Sekiro Shadows Die Twice is the latest game released by From Software, the same company that created the Dark Souls series. It's a game I had been anticipating for a while because it was supposed to not only take place in a new setting, but also be completely different from everything else released by this developer. The first thing that struck me was how bad of a console port this is. If you want to play this game in ultra-wide resolutions, you will find out that the game appears to support this, but forgets to scale the aspect ratio accordingly. In other words, ultra-wide monitors are not supported right off the box. You have to find a modder who is kind enough to do the work for the developer. Luckily, there was such a person who managed to do it really quickly. This means that no matter how hard it is to do, it can still be done by one person within a few days. But that's not all. The game supports HDR but has no brightness slider. It's locked at 60 FPS, it has no borderless windowed mode, so your only option is to use external programs to make this happen if you want it. If you decide to just use the normal window mode, which the game features, you only get resolutions of up to 1080p. Nothing more. I have no idea what happened there, but that's what happens. With the ultra-wide fix, I was able to run the game in 32:9 and it worked fine. Sadly, it would not scale to 21:9 for me in full screen since I don't have a 21:9 monitor, so I had to run it in windowed mode and use a program in order to force a borderless window upon it. This was the only way I could record the footage for this video. Since this port is so terrible, this meant that while I was in windowed mode, I could only record in 1080p. So the game looks slightly worse in this video than it would normally look and that it looked for me when I was playing it in 32:9, especially because it's also stretched. If you want to play it in full screen mode, it should work nicely with the ultra wide fix though. The drawback is that all the user interface does not scale up, so when you sneak or when you are hurt there will be a weird frame in the middle of the screen, but that is really the least of our problems. So if anyone needs help with the fix, let me know and I can send it to you. I still have it and I will keep it. Since it is a terrible port, controlling the game with a keyboard and mouse is possible, but highly impractical, so I decided to use my PlayStation 4 gamepad. On Windows 10, the games usually simply recognize it and even offer prompts for it, rather than the typical Xbox layout. Guess what? Sekiro does not recognize the gamepad. I had to install another external program to be able to run that, and I had to decipher the Xbox layout because the prompts remain for that one. They don't switch to PlayStation 4. So in order to run this game properly and be able to record it, I had to use a mod for ultra-wide aspect, a program for the PlayStation 4 gamepad, a program that forces borderless windowed mode, and the recording software. Just imagine it, just for the one game. That's crazy. What a pain in the ass, honestly. We're hitting developer laziness levels that shouldn't even be possible. Well, after all that, I was finally able to start playing the game, and within the first 2 hours, I came to realize that this is a heavily modded Dark Souls game. I think I'm having Dark Souls fatigue at this point, but I'm beginning to grow more and more annoyed about the fact that From Software seem to be hell-bent on their gameplay model. I mean, everything is here, from the bonfires to the shrine with the maiden and the Estus flasks. Everything screams Dark Souls. They probably looked at Neo and thought to themselves, they stole our gameplay and put it in medieval Japan. We can do that even better. And so here we are, a Neo game made by the original Dark Souls developers. And when I say Neo, I don't mean the guy from the Matrix, I mean the game Neo H, Neo. Even the old problems are back, such as bad camera movement when there are large enemies, being grabbed by enemies even though you could swear that you were outside of their reach, having pressed the button only to find out that the character just didn't want to do what he was told. It's all there. This is the reason why I've had Bloodborne for over a year and I still have not gotten to playing it. Now I know that this review started off like a rant, but the truth is that I had such high hopes for this game, and having to deal with the technical problems and then facing the facts that it is essentially another Dark Souls that isn't Dark Souls was like a cold shower in the winter for me. What's the point of them saying they are done with the Dark Souls series when they keep making Dark Souls and simply naming it differently? But let me tell you about the game in detail. There's a lot to tell and not all of it is bad. We will start with the visuals. The game looks okay at best. I remember when Dark Souls 3 came out and I looked upon it, it was gorgeous. Not to mention that it ran better than Sekiro and even had a native PS4 gamepad support. The looks of this game simply aren't sufficient for something in 2019. The reason for that is obvious. This is what happens when you develop a game primarily for consoles. You have to work with limited hardware, and it's understandable. That's why one should not develop from that point of view. The order should be from greater to lesser, and not the other way around. Make the game run on strong hardware and then simply limit things until the budget hardware can handle it as well. On the other hand, the sound is excellent. We even get the option to choose between the English and Japanese voices, and there are no wrong choices here as both are excellent. The music is good, although not nearly as good as the one in Dark Souls, but that's due to the fact that we have traditional Japanese orchestral music here, whereas in Dark Souls we had something more European in sound, so I suspect that a Japanese person would probably prefer Sekiro's soundtrack over the one from Dark Souls. It might be more my personal taste, that's what I'm trying to say. Our character actually speaks in this game as well. The only downside here is that he doesn't do much of it. If he gets a chance to say something, it's mostly a short yes or a grunt. Very rarely will he actually form full sentences. Still, the voice acting is excellent, even though it is, again, exactly as it is in all the other Souls games. What do I mean by this? Well, this is something you need to hear to understand, but all the characters in these games speak quietly and softly with a hint of depression in their voice. It sounds very interesting and unique, and thus makes it easy to recognize. My issue here is that they didn't even try to change even that. It's just, it feels like we're having NPCs from Dark Souls in this new world, and it kind of doesn't belong. It's very unique, I'll give you that, but it is just somehow the same again. A major improvement, however, when compared to the Souls games, is that this one actually has a story. And before people start telling me how Dark Souls and Bloodborne have a complex story, let me explain that a story which requires the whole community to get together and try to figure out what the game is all about through item descriptions and so on is equal to no story. A story is like a bowl of soup. If I spread it out in 1,000 drops and hide each drop throughout the house and let you find them individually, I think we can all agree that it's not the same as having a fucking bowl of soup to eat. Well, in any case, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice is the first game by From Software with a proper story. It just sucks that the story is bad. There's almost no character development and many questions are left unanswered. Now let's get to the meat of the game, its gameplay. If you've ever played a Souls game or one of their copies, you will have a pretty good idea of how it goes. Usually the player is encouraged to play defensively due to the extremely punishing nature of the combat. You can't really handle too many hits, and even the simplest enemies can take you down quickly. One of the major changes in this game is the removal of the stamina system. In previous titles you would usually have a stamina bar which determines how long you can perform any action. From blocking to running and attacking, pretty much everything used to cost stamina in From's games. Now your character is no longer limited by that. You enjoy infinite stamina, which serves to motivate you to play much more aggressively. In addition to that, you can jump and even have a grappling hook. And I know that some of you will remember that in the Souls games it was possible to perform something akin to a jump when you sprint, but it was a clumsy thing with limited use. In Sekiro you can not only jump properly, but you can even double jump on walls and opponents. The added mobility from the grappling hook adds a new level of verticality to the maps, making our protagonist a true shinobi capable of going in and out of combat in the blink of an eye. These mechanics go well with the dramatically improved stealth system. There was always a minor form of stealth in the Souls games, but in Sekiro it's actually a proper stealth. You get to hide in vegetation and surprise enemies from above and while peeking around corners. Still, make no mistake, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice is not a stealth game. The enemies are positioned in such a way that it's almost never possible to kill more than one opponent before the rest of his buddies notice. The main way of cleaning house remains the good old close quarters combat. This is where Sekiro becomes the closest to being its own game. Everyone's life, and that includes our protagonist, is governed by two stats, health and posture. Health is the same as in every other game. You have a set amount, and once that is gone, you die. Posture is essentially the same as poise used to be in Dark Souls, with the difference that now it doesn't only stagger you when you lose it, but it opens up a chance for what is known as a death blow. This is why posture is almost always the stat you will be trying to deplete in enemies. Death blows will not only kill most enemies outright, but they are also what is required in order to activate some of your special shinobi techniques. Another unique thing about the game is that most things need to die several times before they are truly dead. hence the subtitle of the game, Shadows Die Twice. While it is targeted towards our protagonist, the rule applies to the stronger opponents as well. Let's start with our character first. At the beginning of the game you can revive after being killed once. You die, as is usual in these games, and then you have the choice to resurrect on the spot. Nothing lost. This can be used strategically as most enemies will lose interest in you once you have died and start walking back to their original positions. Sekiro has a limited time to revive himself. Wait too long and the window of opportunity will close and your death will become permanent. If you do it right, however, you will be able to sneak behind the bastard who killed you and deliver a death blow out of stealth, which is possible without having to chip down on their posture. However, be careful because you only resurrect with a limited amount of health. Survive long enough and eliminate a few more enemies and you might just refill that lost life point and have yet another resurrection available. Later on you can even gain a third life. This amazing ability is explained within the story of the game. What does not make much sense story-wise is the fact that every named enemy in the game is also capable of using it. Normal enemies must be killed only once in order for them to die. There are a few exceptions to this, but in almost every case it is true. Then you have the named guys. Enemies with proper names such as generals, demonic creatures, etc. They fulfill the role of mini-bosses and are not only much tougher but need to be killed multiple times. This rule also applies to the true bosses. For some of them there is an explanation later on in the story, but for others there is no explanation and they just need to be killed several times, that's it, period. I will not go into any deeper details because I don't want to spoil the already weak story. The main way to damage the posture of your enemies is by deflecting their attacks. In this game, both the deflect and block are governed by one and the same button. If you time your deflect and press the button just as the attack of the enemy is about to connect, you will cause serious posture damage to your enemies. There is always the option of evading an attack as well, and in some cases you must do it because some attacks cannot be deflected. One of the most interesting combat mechanics involve the many fighting styles that can be used. Your character has a prosthetic arm which can be loaded with various offensive and defensive mechanisms, adding an additional layer of combat options. But if that's not enough, you can learn a ton of different techniques as you play, some by finding hidden items, others through leveling up. While our protagonist is a shinobi and will only use his katana throughout the game, the additional combat abilities make it so that you can find the style that suits you best. But since I mentioned the death mechanics earlier, let's talk about the one kind of death there used to be a lot of in Dark Souls, the death by falling. Whether it was falling from great height and hitting the ground too hard or was simply by falling into a bottomless pit, both were a constant companion in Dark Souls. Now that in Sekiro you can jump and grapple, the maps often feature lots of bottomless pits and high places. However, it would seem that falling damage is lower now and falling into a pit is simply harder to do. Unlike before, you will almost never actually be pushed off the map by being hit or by pressing the wrong direction. There is sort of an invisible force protecting you from most of these cases, so falling down will be very rare and in most situations will only happen because you actually pressed the jump button and navigated the jump towards the pit. This is good because with all the spots you can use to grapple, it would suck if the player had to be afraid of falling. It's so forgiving in fact that falling into the bottomless pits will not kill you outright, but simply subtract a set amount of health and teleport you back to where you fell from. Of course, if you've had less health and the set amount is still required, so you cannot cover it, you will still die. And no, you cannot resurrect from within the pit that you have fallen. Once you die, and die you shall, one of two things happens. You will either resurrect and have lost half of your money and experience, or you will resurrect and have lost nothing. The latter of the two is called Unseen Aid, which is initially a 30% chance to trigger, but as you die will decrease. So meaning that the more you die, the more the game actually punishes you for that, which is very weird and something that I remember from Dark Souls 2, for example. There is a way to cure this using a fairly rare item. This reminds me of the humanity mechanics in the Dark Souls games. There are no corpse runs anymore, and to be honest, I do like that. This lets you change your approach. You are no longer forced to try a difficult battle over and over just because you have to recover your lost XP like it was in the older Souls games. Now you will most often lose half of your XP and money And that's that. You can then choose to go somewhere else if you so desire. And speaking of experience points, you now gain levels automatically. Attributes don't really exist like in the classical sense. You gain levels by gaining experience and can use skill points to unlock new skills. This requires you to rest at a sculptor's idol, which is the new version of a Dark Souls bonfire. Your attack power increases as you defeat bosses, your health and posture increase by collecting special items from strong enemies. As you can see, that part has been simplified, and I must say that it's a double-edged sword. You are no longer given the option to grind levels and improve stats, and then try a difficult boss again. On the other hand, it serves to discourage grinding, which is a good thing. Gaining levels helps, but much less than it used to before, because you can't really increase the damage or the health and posture that you have. Now let's talk a bit about the side quests. If you have played any Souls games before, you will remember those moments when you meet some NPC and they tell you about something in a very delirious and cryptic ways. Back then it made sense because everyone in the land of Dark Souls is crazy. Here, however, it really doesn't. Regardless, almost everyone is crazy as well, and they will give you hints on what you need to do and to find and then give them, but more often than not, you will take a path, reach its end, fight a really strong enemy. Upon defeating it, you will come to see that there is something that the enemy was guarding, some kind of weird item with seemingly no use. This is where you have to use Google to figure out what you have just found and who to give it to. And even so, some events ask you to come back later, and it's quite unclear what triggers the progression, so you are left to constantly come back and check on NPCs, which is super annoying and is a reminder of games past. The game does try to explain some things a bit more by making it so you can eavesdrop on conversations. Sometimes you can see some guards talking to each other, and if you use your eavesdrop ability, you will be able to hear what they're talking about. It's a minimal thing, but I appreciate it, and it does help a little bit to clarify some things. Now that I've explained most of the game's mechanics, let's talk about how they work. Let's start with the most important one, the combat. I've explained how deflecting is Sekiro's bread and butter. If you remember the parry technique in Dark Souls, and you are a filthy casual player such as myself, then you probably sucked hard at it. It required you to react within such a tiny window of opportunity that it was simply too much to ask of people who are just not that good at games in general. In Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, this has been simplified and the window of opportunity is significantly larger. This makes countering the simpler enemies a matter of minimal practice. When it comes to stronger and especially faster enemies, things change dramatically. This is where the casual players are going to get the shaft. There are simply too many complicated and fast attacks, and it can quickly be overwhelming. Mashing doesn't work here, so it's either a lot of skills or a lot of deaths and frustration. The fact that you will sometimes press the button but your character will simply not do what you have just ordered doesn't make things better. And let's also consider that there are a type of unblockable attacks known as Perilous Attacks, which demand a special response from the player. A sweeping Perilous Attack, for example, requires the player to double jump on top of the enemy to avoid the attack and do some posture damage. Any other reaction leads to taking damage. Another type of Perilous Attack requires a dodge counter technique known as Mikiri Counter. Grabbing Perilous Attacks cannot be countered in any way, so they must be dodged. But good luck dodging large enemies with hitboxes bigger than their visible bodies. And this is all, by the way, happening very fast, and the only way for you to find out that it's happening is by observing the enemy and paying attention. And if you see a kanji sign over your character's head, you know that this is when it's gonna happen, and now you have to quickly figure out. You only get a split second to recognize which kind of Perilous Attack is being performed and take the proper action. So it's difficult and it doesn't always work. It would seem that the game has a different interpretation of what constitutes the moment before the attack connects, based on the specific enemy you are fighting and the weapon they are holding. You can be too soon or too late, even though what you see on the screen clearly shouldn't have been interpreted as such. So the combat is fast, hectic, visceral, and will be both super satisfying and super frustrating. When everything works well, you end up killing your enemies in cinematic style and feel like a shinobi god. When it starts bugging out and killing you unfairly, it's so frustrating that you sometimes have to stop playing because your anger is lowering your skills even more. My personal opinion is that the game is harder than any of the Souls games, and sadly it often ends up harder due to problems and bad enemy design. Let's talk about looting. Once you have killed an enemy, you have to loot them. In the Souls games, you would pass the corpses by and whatever was dropped by the dead enemy would just magically come to you. Now the same things happen, but with the difference that you have to actually hold a button for that. I have no idea what they were thinking when they implemented this change. What purpose does this mundane change serve exactly? My guess is as good as yours, perhaps to piss off the player by making them waste time on something boring. What do I know? When it comes to picking up normal items, you go next to them and you press the prompt that appears, just as it used to be always. But looting enemy corpses now requires active holding the button as you pass them by. It's absolutely weird, I have no idea. Another similar thing happens when you jump next to a ledge and want Sekiro to grab it. You actually have to press a button, and not only do you press it, but you have to time the press. The grabbing animation is short, and if not timed properly, our protagonist misses the ledge with his hand. I can imagine that the idea behind this was that you would not want your character to stick to every ledge like an idiot just because you're jumping towards it. Think of Assassin's Creed and you will know what I'm talking about. However, given the fact that there are only specific types of ledges Sekiro can grab onto, it seems like this issue would have been a very rare occurrence. This one is not as stupid as the looting, but I personally still find it very stupid and annoying. Then there is the grappling. Oftentimes it works very well and you can grapple like a boss, but sometimes the point is right there, and no matter how much you try to adjust your character and the camera, you are never getting the prompt to press the button and use the grapple. I've actually had a case where I was chasing an enemy who jumped on a roof and I couldn't follow because of this. I had to walk back, find the perfect angle before the indicator appeared. It can be very frustrating, and in cases where you are trying to grab onto something while falling off the map, it can outright kill you if it happens. So as you can see, I have many complaints about the game. It's an awful console port, the graphics look dated, it tends to not always work as it should, and is generally even harder than its predecessors. The game's main issue is that it's too much like every other Souls game. I will agree that a lot has been changed, but at the very same time, so much is the same that it feels like a total conversion mod rather than its own game. In the words of BioShock Infinite, there's always a lighthouse, there's always a man, there's always a city. It's the same here. There's always a bonfire, there's always a shrine, etc. I feel that if Sekiro had a difficulty setting, it would be so much more accessible and enjoyable. I enjoy these kind of games. I've played through all of them except for Bloodborne. I've played through Dark Souls 3 a total of 10 consecutive times. Even though the game got harder, the balance was there. With Sekiro I am on my second playthrough and I don't think I will continue playing. It's too frustrating and exhausting to die all the time. At this point the game is so hard that it demands a level of muscle memory which can only be achieved through playing the same segments over and over again. At some point it's less about having fun and more like work. You repeat and get a little bit better until you finally overcome the obstacle just for the rush of serotonin caused by the victory. Maybe I'm getting old, but as I have less and less free time on my hands, I value it more and more. This game is hard for the sake of being hard. Its difficulty was once a sales pitch. They used to tell us to prepare to die, and in a world where every game was just a form of puppy love, From Software introduced a game that raped the player mercilessly, and we loved it. But we loved it because it was a novelty. It's time for them to offer us some difficulty settings. I know I would enjoy the game so much more if I didn't have such a hard time playing it. I know many people who are curious but deterred by the difficulty. A difficulty setting would serve to satisfy everyone. I'm also sure that the game will sell better this way. I for one will probably skip the next game if it ends up being super hard without the option to adjust the difficulty. I've had many enjoyable moments with this game, but I could say the same about the levels of frustration I felt while playing it. When you draw the line, that's not what having fun should be like. So should you play Sekiro Shadows Die Twice? If you've enjoyed the other games by From Software, then perhaps yes. If you have never played any Souls games, this would also be an okay entry game, because it is unique and in some ways it is better than the others, but then again in others it's not, so it's up to you really. If you are curious, you should start with any of them, might as well be this one. The only person who should avoid this game is a person who hates the idea of constantly dying and having to replay the same segment many times over. The difficulty of this game is between hard and crazy hard and will truly test your resolve. And one final piece of advice, play it on console if you can. Clearly that's how it was meant to be played. Well, looks like that was another long review and a very critical one at that. If you've had the patience to listen to all of this, you are either deterred or more motivated to play the game than ever. No matter which one it ends up being, I hope I've helped you decide. In any case, thank you for watching and have a great day.